Welcome to the Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I will share some insights and ideas from my guest expert. I have with me today Kristen Liesch, and together we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So we're going to introduce our friend, Dr. Kristen Liesch. She is co-CEO at Title Equality, and she comes to us with a rich background. So she is actually our first Canadian guest, which we're very excited about. She was also named in Forbes 10 Diversity and Inclusion Trailblazers you need to get familiar with. Kristen is a strategist, educator with 15 plus years of experience designing transformative curricula, implementing equitable process changes, and capacity building programs to support the design of more equitable organizations in Canada and New Zealand. Her unique academic background informs her methodology as a strategist and consultant working to advance equity. Combining practices and theories from the social sciences, education, and interdisciplinary humanities, Kristen supports leaders as they work towards cultivating more equitable, effective, and prosperous organizations. She has a PhD from the University of Auckland and a Bachelor of Education from the University of Alberta. She is also the founder and principal of Blue Switch Consulting Incorporated. Welcome, Kristen. So excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Well, as we were connecting and the D&I worlds collide and sometimes across country lines, I know we were
That's right.
talking about, all sorts of differences. We're going to dig into some cultural differences and things that we see here in the U.S. versus in Canada. And I know your work goes well beyond those borders. So we're going to dig into that today. But before we get into that, help our listeners understand, how did you get into this line of work? How did you find your way into diversity and inclusion?
Great question, Julie. And I wish I had a bit more of a linear answer for you, but essentially my background kind of set me up for this. I mean, I was a teacher once upon a time in junior and high school, and I spent a lot of my time there teaching English literature and also social studies, wherein we pursued topics like equality and social justice, and it was really important to me in that space. But when I was doing my postgrad studies in Auckland, I was also starting my family, and I had an infant at the time, and I was also reading a lot of the work of the kind of turn of the 20th century female writers, and a lot of them were gender activists and gender rights activists. And I remember reading kind of their personal correspondence to each other and kind of the things that they would say about the struggles that they faced. And I remember looking at my child at the time and thinking about my life and going, gosh, 120 years ago, and a lot of what I'm reading here isn't too different from what I hear from women today. And that kind of sparked in me the desire to look at how can I, be part of making a different future for my kids and for the people around me. And that kind of put me on a different sort of trajectory where I began to research the promise of behavioral design in organizational change, and that kind of was the beginning of what got me to where I am today. So I started a consultancy doing some behavioral design work and some analytic work in organizations, basically saying, listen, we've got all the data that shows, there's ROI, we've got the business case, that's done, but let's actually dig into the work. And so fast forward a couple of years, and I've partnered with an amazing, incredible, brilliant woman, Anna Dewar-Gully, who's in Toronto, and we work pretty much attached at the hip, and that's where we are today.
That's cool. So much of your story resonates with me as a mother of a young girl. The latest forecast here in the U.S. is we're 208 years away from gender equality.
Yeah.
And I often share that story when I speak, is right from the get-go, this is why I do what I do. And it's kind of always been in me. You're right. It's really fascinating as we approach Women's History Month. You think about all the untold stories of women and just how still our education system here. I have a window into it with my stepdaughter now, who's 16. She was telling me last night at dinner that she's learning about feminism in school. And I just cringed. She told me what she was learning. It was so so different than what's really to be
Hmm.
true about the trailblazers, but it's often in our education system through a male lens.
Right,
So
right, absolutely.
well, we hear about women's feelings and I'm like, oh, is that really the angle we're going to go here? So much that we
Mm.
can clean up and fix. And I'm curious, Kristen, having a different cultural perspective, we talked at the onset when we got connected. I found it so fascinating to hear, as you were talking about where, I'm always curious, are other countries really, that far ahead of the US? Because we know a lot of the data suggests, yes, in fact, they are. And I think the Americans, we want to be competitive on things, and this kind of ignites a competitive spirit. I'm curious, though, from your vantage point, just north of the border, and knowing you do work in New Zealand and all over, what do you see as kind of key cultural differences between, the US, Canada, and other places? What have you seen?
Yeah, so just to clarify, are you thinking, as in what I see in terms of the work being done in those various places and how that's different or the same?
Well, I think what we united on, I think, was an understanding of we have different histories. One of the
Right,
things I found
right,
was really compelling that you shared is, hey, slavery was very, very much a U.S. centric, a part of
right,
our history, and that's where we are from a race perspective is looking
right,
for that. So I'm
right.
curious, as you think about cultural differences with diversity,
Mm,
inclusion, and how we've gotten to where we are.
mm.
What do you
Yeah,
notice from
no,
the different places?
thanks. I appreciate that clarification. You're right. So I think what sparked that for us in our initial conversation, or what came to mind for me was, when there was, you might recall a year and a bit ago when Starbucks had that incident, that it was a
Yeah.
race-based incident. And so they very quickly responded by implementing unconscious bias training for their staff. And not long after, they followed suit in their Canadian retail locations. Now, what emerged was the fact that the same curriculum was used in both of those cases. And what where that doesn't land is, for example, I am not in any way going to suggest that we don't have race issues here. We absolutely have racism, and but the context is slightly different. So, in the States, you've got a history of slavery to contend with. Your relationship among your folks there is slightly different than it is here. And so to duplicate that kind of, it overlooks the fact that every context is going to have its own particular nuances. But not only that, I think what it speaks to is the fact that at present we see a lot of this diversity and inclusion work being done attached very closely to various dimensions of diversity. So we talk about race, age, gender, ethnicity, ability, those sorts of things. And if we picture those as kind of like columns, we attach learning to each of those columns when we talk about diversity and inclusion, or when we do bias training, it's, kind of siphoned into categories. But the fact of the matter is, whether we're talking about a national or regional context, the constellation that is the aggregation of all of those dimensions of diversity is going to look different. It's going to look
Yeah.
different regionally, temporally, in the same way as, if you and I get together in a room, that our visible dimensions of diversity might be the same. We both identify as women, we both identify as mothers, etc. There are going to be things about us that we can't see or read on our bodies that are going to be different. And so when we try and do, for example, race-based bias training, there are a lot of assumptions made that reduce that to concepts that are far too simplistic.
Mhm.
And so I think where our conversation had evolved to before, and where I'd love to take it today, if it's of interest, is, um, when we consider the fact that all of these dimensions of diversity, and I've only named a couple, right? Like there are thousands of them that each of us inhabit. When we start to look at socioeconomic status, when we look at mental health, when we look at education, when we look at political leading, if you've ever taken a look at Harvard's implicit association test,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
they've got a long list that you can choose from, right? In terms of, how do I want to test my own implicit bias? Where do I stand?
Mhm.
And so if each of us embodies that sort of like massive constellation of difference, and if at the same time, when an individual goes about making a decision, whether it's a hiring decision or whether it seems innocuous, like who we invite to the, social event with the client, we also take a lot of mental shortcuts, which we often refer to as cognitive biases, right? Well,
Mhm.
science has cataloged up to 200 of those mental shortcuts that could be made at any given point in time.
Oh,
So
wow.
now you smash those two things together, right? Our ability to make all of those shortcuts and all of these, different dimensions of diversity that we all embody and can potentially have biases for or against. And the idea that a 90-minute session or a 3-hour session to discover our bias is in any way going to prevent folks from making decisions that are influenced by bias is, it's ludicrous when you think of it that way.
Yeah. Oh, I
And
know.
so coming back to what we said before, considering, bringing some sort of programming or training to a new context, to expand that, I'm going to say, we're never going to be able to build things that are going to be perfect in every situation because time changes. Even people's biases have been shown to evolve over time given exposure and things like that. But the one thing that I think, and this is, where I think the real promise lies in the field of diversity and inclusion and for folks who are seeking equality of opportunity and equity and justice, is in learning ways that all of us can apply critical thinking to those everyday decisions that make us, mindful and pause for a moment and think, okay, whose perspectives are at the table here? Whose aren't?
Yeah.
What
That's a
can
really
we be
important
thinking?
question. Who
Right?
isn't at
There
this
are
table?
ways. You got it. Those are the ways that we begin to change the systemic bias built into organizations or communities or institutions, right?
Yeah.
Not by going to the individual and saying, you're now responsible to discover your bias and somehow, short circuit your brain to undo
Right.
them.
It's your
So,
problem to solve alone.
right, right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was just doing an unconscious bias workshop recently, and I'm so glad to hear you say that because it can't be done in even an hour or even a day. People are always asking, how much training do we need? It really
Mm,
is. I mean, systemic barriers are at play that we're all playing in these systems. And we're all a
mm,
part of them and getting advantages and disadvantages from them depending on our perspective. Like you said, 200 different aspects of difference. That's immense. So we can't undo, we see the differences, we feel the differences if they're not visible. We can't undo that wiring in our brain in a short period of time. It has to be an intense
right,
series of events to change behavior, as you know.
right.
Um, and I'm curious. I love the technique, the pause. And what I'd love for our listeners to walk away with based on all that great data and information you just shared with us, Kristen, is you alone can't make the difference, right? But you can
Got
make
it.
a big
Mm-hmm,
difference, right? By your own behavior and what you model for
mm-hmm,
others. And if you simply
mm-hmm,
take a pause in a meeting, in a conversation, when you see something or feel something that doesn't feel right, or a perspective is being missed, or someone's not included, whatever it is, when it doesn't feel right. You don't need a
mm,
list of these things. But I think what we don't know is what to do. And
mm,
simply giving yourself some breathing room just to pause and say, time out. Whoa, something doesn't feel right here. What's going on? What, like you said,
mm,
what perspective is missing? What could we be doing differently here? How do I know that this is true about this person? Just questioning your own assumptions is really powerful.
mm.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that.
No, go ahead. Yeah. Hmm.
Please, Kristen.
Right. I was going to say, that actionable piece, um, it's so many of these conversations that we're having kind of in social media and on LinkedIn and things like that. Again, the diversity and inclusion conversation or these considerations for inclusion or for being, watching out for blind spots, things like that.
Yeah.
They're often sliced away and kind of divorced from overall objectives, right?
Mhm.
Folks, unless you're on a D&I team or committee or you're the D&I leader, most folks don't come to work with their primary objective being related to that. So a good example I can give you is actually, we've worked it's a financial institution, not recently, and they've got a really awesome, really large global network of people who are working on diversity and inclusion initiatives and related work, and they have produced some really fantastic content that's really leading the way in their field. And I was in a branch the other day, and I noticed kind of there was a computer screen up, right, a TV in the waiting area of the branch, and I noticed, when I was looking up there, it was kind of typical for some marketing. It showed a couple, getting a mortgage in a bank, speaking to a manager or whatever. But what occurred to me was, I kind of feel not represented in that. I am divorced, so for that's one thing. And I'm also not this beautiful blonde person. But how much more would someone walking into the branch who is maybe a newcomer to Canada, or someone or a younger person or an older person might look at that and wonder, is this really the place for me?
Yep.
And I brought this to the attention of our key contact there, and he said, that's a really interesting kind of perspective, because a lot of the work, like I said, that they produce through the D&I stream is very inclusive. It's really kind of on the forefront of this work. And on the product side and on the promotion side, it's not a consideration to the extent that it is for D&I. And yet, if kind of the considerations of who is it that is our client, who do we work for, who do we serve, how do we serve them? How do we know we are? Where are our blind spots? There's an opportunity there, not just to, further and deepen the inclusion narrative of that organization, but to tap into markets that may currently be undertapped, right? Or to serve their diverse clientele and communities in new ways and make them feel included and represented in the institution's overall kind of presence in the world. And so when we're talking about what can we do, the first thing is to kind of understand that, not only do underrepresented groups benefit when we start considering them as members of both the people that we serve as well as the people in our organizations who might have different ways they want to be represented or need to be represented, but the fact that when we make those considerations, it is that rising tide that lifts all boats. It is not, we don't consider the needs of diverse people and then someone else loses.
Right.
We consider the needs of diverse people, and then actually we're all served a lot better, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I mean, the disabilities community is a great example of that. When we make things more accessible for people in wheelchairs or people that are have different abilities, the majority group, the able-bodied group, actually benefits. You can ride bikes along curbs now, and it's like,
right, yeah, bikes and strollers, and it all of a sudden becomes a lot easier for everybody.
Right. So it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, that is one of the early on in the process before people understand how to be an ally. This is one of the apathetic responses I get is, well, if we do everything for the diverse, blah, 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 fill in the blank group, then somehow the majority group is losing out. It's like, whoa.
Right.
How'd you get there?
Right. It's not a zero-sum game, is it?
No, absolutely not. Great points there. And Kristen, I know from your vantage point, you're seeing all sorts of organizations do amazing things. My listeners are always looking for a story, an example, a nugget that they can take and maybe apply to their organization. So I'm curious, what are some good examples that you might use to illustrate things that our listeners could do in their organizations?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's top of mind for a lot of organizations now, particularly in the States, given kind of new legislation that's emerging, and that's the advancement of women, right? And getting women into leadership roles. I know that, there's new pledges coming out every day. The Fortune 500 companies are pledging, and everybody's kind of wrapped up and committing to, we're going to make a concerted effort to advance women into leadership roles. And that's excellent. It's a fantastic, any day is a good day to start doing that work. But what many organizations will jump to are some tactics, right? So an organization might get somebody to do some research, or they might say, we've heard a lot about mentoring, sponsorship, let's start that. And what I would actually suggest is to just take take a beat, and I'm going to give you an example for why. So we did some work with a professional services firm, and they're part of a field that's notorious for poorly advancing women into partnership roles. And so in our first earlier conversations with this organization, the leaders were telling us, we're never going to be able to fix this problem. Like, sure, we can try and maybe make some token appointments, but this is not going to be solved because, and they said, these women are going to say to us, we need to change the billable hour, we need flexible working arrangements. We simply can't provide that to them. Like, those are not things we're going to change or are prepared to change. But sure, go ahead and do the work, is what they told us. And so we believe very, very strongly that people who face inequity are the ones who have the best ideas for how to solve those problems. And so part of our practice and our methodology is to go to people who face inequity and say, listen, tell us all about this problem. Tell it to us from every single angle you can think of so we understand it really well from your perspective. And then let's find some opportunities to begin solving that problem. And so when we went to this group of female associates at the firm, we brought them this challenge, how are we going to advance women in this firm? What are the challenges you face and what opportunities do you see? And what came out of this was incredibly insightful, because what we didn't hear was we need to change the billable hour and we need more flexible working arrangements. What they said was, listen, we know that to be considered for partner, we need to have really good, strong relationships with our clients, because that goes a long way. But we're not getting opportunities to have face time with the clients on whose files we're working really hard. And so what they really wanted was, bring us to dinner, tap us for the golf game, because organically they weren't being the ones invited. And this was in a regional context that's relatively conservative, in an energy kind of sector. And so a lot of the time, yeah, okay. So a lot of the time, the male associates, just by de facto, were being asked, hey, come to the hockey game with client X. And so they were going and they were developing strong relationships, and they were the ones advancing. And the women are saying, whether we like hockey or not, and some of us do, we're just not being asked. And so one of the changes, so what I'm getting at is the first thing they can do, any organization can do, is ask your people, because it's the people in your ranks who are going to have really good ideas for how you can go about solving some equity challenges that you've got in your organization, and do that in a way that allows them to be courageous and candid, whether that means bringing in third party or finding a way to create that psychological safety, because you're going to find incredible insights. But I want to just kind of add to this story, because the outcome of this was twofold. Number one, they came up with a myriad of ideas to help them advance. But with this one particular piece on the FaceTime, it was a quick change. So what happened after this was discovered was marketing. Anytime a senior partner would request marketing materials or event tickets or what have you to take clients out, they would then pull up the hours billed file that would show which associate had billed the most hours on this client file. So now the partner can look at that list and go, oh, David's not the one billing the most hours, Natasha is. So, hey, Natasha, you want to come to dinner, coffee or hockey or whatever. So that was a systems change, right? So it kind of removed the ad hoc, I'm just going to status quo pick whoever's nearest to me who happens to be a guy, and made it actually a more meritocratic process, you know what I mean? But not only that, the women in this firm, they noticed, a lot of our client work is done in the energy sector, and that's fine, but there are opportunities in this region that are emerging that we're not tapping into. There are new companies, there are nascent sectors, and we haven't really touched on them because by and large, the people making decisions at our firm are quite, comfortable in this space, and that's just about the only place we've looked for clients. But here's this missing opportunity. And so what I'm trying to get to is, when this organization decided to learn from and listen to the experiences and best ideas of this underserved group that was facing equity challenges, not only did they come out with opportunities to help rectify those equity issues, but new business opportunities as well.
Everyone wins.
Hmm.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of times people say, "Well, my industry is male dominated," and I have to respond, there is not a female dominated industry. It's a function of our history. You know, we talk about
That's right.
history, and who's created the modern workplace? Men, mostly white
Hmm.
men. And things haven't changed that much, and so golf outings, hockey games, basketball, football,
Hmm.
you know, things that traditionally men have been involved in and been allowed to play more so than women, have been primary social activities, and so that drives a different relationship dynamic, and as I remember
Hmm.
in my corporate days, I liked sports. I had no problem, doing the sports stuff. But, at the same time, it's like, well, do you wanna do the more quote unquote "female" type of things too? Because 'Cause I'm having to stretch this way, why don't you? And so I love
Hmm.
this visual example of these commonplace activities that don't seem like a big deal, a golf outing here, men going out to something here, but over time, it affects the relationship. And, I think
Hmm.
people do shortcut these things to think, "Oh, women just want flexibility. Women, people of color want this." And,
Hmm.
it's not that simple. And you do have to go to the group that is facing inequity, like you said, to really discover
Hmm.
what are the barriers and how do we eliminate those systemic barriers. So
Hmm.
excellent. I
Hmm.
love the full circle. The business case on the other side is it helps your business be better, right? And so
You got it.
again, not a zero-sum game. Well, the
Mm.
last question I have for you, Kristen, and kind of thinking about all your years of experience and putting we're at 2020 and thinking about the
Mm.
future of D&I, and there's so many people coming into the space, which makes me
Mm.
excited for the future. What do you see? Like, what do you see as trends? What
Mm.
are the hot topics? What are your clients talking about wanting to do more of? What do you see? Where's your crystal ball point?
That's an interesting question. I think my crystal ball if I'm gonna kind of like share the murky part first and then the shiny part second. So something I'm concerned that we're gonna see more of is window dressing. And I'm sure you know what I mean by this, right?
We're
If you
doing
were to,
everything.
for
Check
example,
the box.
right, you got it. So ticking the box, and I mean that's been a thing since the 60s, right? Since kind of like the early employment rights movements. But now, we've got social media, and social media is a fantastic and cheap place for organizations to promote what will look like a diverse, inclusive culture in an organization committed to those things. It's really, really easy to, host a women's conference or to hire a D&I leader, but it's just as easy to, fill a room full of, and I'll just be frank, with white women, or to hire a D&I leader who's got zero budget. And so I think that we need to be cognizant of not helping to perpetuate kind of this naked emperor thing, right? Where we perpetuate a narrative in the world where things seem like they're advancing when, World Bank data and data from all over the place is showing that inequality is not only a thing, but it is on the rise. So we've seen plateaus since the 90s of women in management. That hasn't changed, right? And that's 30 years. So I think it's really important to, one, understand that we're going to continue to see this, window dressing as a real thing, and be cognizant of that and do what we can to kind of shine a light on where there is real good work
Mhm.
being done, as well as call out when we see things, let's maybe not participate in things that are primarily window dressing as practitioners, I mean,
Mhm.
and as participants to really push people and ask them, but this is great, this fanfare and what have you, but wait, let's have a hard conversation about where we're really at. And so that kind of brings me round to where I'd like to, this the shining piece. And there is I'm you're gonna have to think, I don't know if you do show notes, but there is a new book out, and I believe it's called Diversity Inc. And I've only just dipped into it, and so I can't even tell you the author, so please put that in the show notes.
I'll
But
find
it's
it.
thanks. It's essentially it's getting back to the fact that we started with a conversation about equality a long time ago with the civil rights movement and women's rights and employment laws and things like that. And the conversation has shifted, and we've introduced terms and concepts like diversity and inclusion. And we'll say, yes, you can have diversity, but what's diversity without inclusion? And I'd go a step further and say we actually need to make a bit of a return here, because it is possible to have an organization with a diverse workforce. It's possible to have an organization with a diverse workforce and an inclusive culture. But you can still have an organization with both of those things and not equality of opportunity for all your people. So the concept that we can just be diverse and inclusive is not the end of it. If everyone in an organization doesn't have the opportunity to achieve their full potential, whatever that looks like, then we're not there. And so I think we're going to see a bit of a return to discussing equality of opportunity, and equity and what the connection is between those two things. And so that's where I think we're going to see the conversation go in the next decade.
Yeah. Well, I like that call to action. We're interviewing D&I practitioners inside and outside of organizations this season. And I've come to that conclusion myself. It's refreshing to hear that from you is, come in and do the one, check the box, ta-da, Women's History Month, talk about this,
Mm-hmm.
D&I Awareness Month, come in and talk about this. It just doesn't feel so good to me. Now it's different.
Mm,
It's part of an overall initiative that's threaded through with other intentional efforts to educate people. Absolutely.
mm,
I think education
mm-hmm,
can come from within the organization. Absolutely. Um,
mm,
but you need to be very mindful about how you intentionally create a culture where this is important. This is a non-negotiable for our cultural values. We have a strong why behind it that's got the business case, but also the human case to it. And we're truly focused on equity for everybody because that's the right way
mm-hmm.
to do business, like you said. And so it's interesting when you see some of those red flags to not, not engage or, I've developed a new assessment tool, kind of 20 questions to assess kind of the landmines in an organization before I engage with organizations now.
Mm,
Just to help see, like, what are the challenges? How rough is it? How comprehensive
right,
of a solution do they need? Because it's like giving a small dose of medicine to somebody that has cancer sometimes. I mean,
right.
it's not gonna work. It's not gonna have the impact they want. It's not gonna be a good use of my time. So I think really focusing on organizations that are intentional and their leadership team is committed
Mm,
for real
mm-hmm,
to it, not just mouthpieces, but legitimately committed.
mm.
That's good stuff. And I did look up that book, Diversity Inc. I'm curious.
Oh, you've got it. Yeah.
Yep, good stuff. Well, Kristen, if you could leave our listeners with just one thing, and I know there's always a plethora of things available, but one thing, one nugget, one takeaway, one lesson learned that you can impart in people's minds, what would it be?
Oh, this is a question I would have loved to ask. If I could impart one thing, I think honestly it would probably be tied to our values, and I think we share some, candor, courage, equality, and empathy. I think never
Mhm.
stop having the bravery to keep learning and realizing that you can be wrong about things. But similarly, having the empathy it takes to let others make mistakes too, because I think at the end of the day, this is going to take a lot of humans, and we are fallible, right? It's going to take a
Mhm.
lot of humans working together in different kinds of ways. If we're ever going to, like you said, change that number so that, for example, gender equality doesn't take more than 2 centuries to achieve, you know, and so I think it's really let's let's be brave. Let's talk honestly with each other. Let's be empathetic and aim towards equality together.
Yeah, I love that bravery and courage. I absolutely salute that mantra. These are candid conversations. They
Mm,
require real vulnerability. And in the spirit of that, one thing I'd share with my listeners is I'm learning every day and I say
mm,
things, non-inclusive words that I correct myself on.
mm,
Sometimes I
mm,
don't. Sometimes other people correct me. And I'm actually
mm.
excited when that happens. Like, cool. Like I'm not
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you for feeling like it's okay to correct one another. We have to
Yeah.
trust then. But I had an experience over the summer. I was developing my Lead Like an Ally inclusive leadership program. And I admittedly, I strive to be an ally for the LGBTQ community. But at the time, I only knew a little bit. I mean, honestly, I'd done some research, I'd read some books, but gone to the Pride Festival, things like that. But as a straight ally or wanting to be a straight ally, I didn't know a lot. And so I wrote this content and I thought, things is what, if you were to be an ally for the LGBT community, I think this would be what would be helpful. And I got feedback from a number of people in the LGBTQ plus community, and in particular, a trans woman that shared with me a fire hose of feedback about my content. And I will say, it was a tough pill to swallow. I felt very defensive at first. I felt
Mm-hmm.
hurt. I felt like, what am I doing writing this content? I mean, to be honest, I really felt that way. And then I thought,
Yeah.
wow, what an opportunity to learn. And the
Right.
minority group, especially we know white males inside organizations, I think they
Yeah.
feel that way a lot, like, great, I did it wrong again. And so it was a really great
Yeah.
window into empathy for who I talk to a lot. I'm like, wow, I got
Mhm.
it wrong. It's okay to get it wrong. And she's helping me be better. Now, so fast
Yeah.
forward today, and the reason I mention this today is because I just did a workshop and she was involved in it. And she gave me some really
Oh.
great feedback and just wrote a review on my new book. And I just thought, wow, things go full circle.
Hmm.
It's not personal. It had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And I rewrote
No, that's
the
right.
content and it's all better. And so we all win. To
Yeah.
your point, it's a win-win
Yeah.
situation. But in the murky middle, it feels deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that is such a great kind of story to share, and you have been candid with that, and I think it's useful in so many ways, partly because, like, arguably you and I are folks who are, kind of professionals in this space, or would be considered professionals in this space, and we slip up. And the point of that is, these terms, understandings, they evolve with our culture and our
Yeah.
society, and
Yeah.
so of course, an average person whose job is totally unrelated to this and who may not even have like a personal desire to know more, it creates its own exclusion, doesn't it? When we have right and wrong words, if we can't say, you know what, yeah, this is learning and we're all going to make mistakes. But if our intention and we keep aiming towards that, equality is the objective. Can we agree on that? Does everyone deserve equality of opportunity? If so, then let's just keep messing up together towards
Right.
that.
Right. I love that. I love that commitment. I might start using that in my talks. Hey, is everyone believe in equality up front? Right. Okay. So if someone says something that's not perfect, we're gonna be okay with that, right?
Right. You got it.
I have to say, if we're waiting for our allies to be perfect, we will wait forever. It's just not
You got
gonna
it.
happen. Gotta meet them where they're at.
No.
Well, it has
Yeah.
been fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and your experience and your research and your stories and your ideas. It's been fantastic. I certainly appreciate you, Kristen.
Likewise. Always a fantastic conversation.
And let our listeners know, where is the best place to follow you, and we'll also link to that in the show notes.
Well, LinkedIn is where I live half the time, so they can find
Don't we
me
all?
there. But otherwise, you can reach me at Kristen@titleequality.com. That's also our website, titleequality.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Did you know that you can find all 5 seasons of our 50 plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? And you can sign up for a complimentary 7-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally, and order our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button, connect with me on LinkedIn, simply search Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger. We are one.